So I would like to welcome everybody to the NAL First Thursday program. Today is September 7th, which means that officially there are 2 short weeks until autumn officially begins. Anybody else believe that? Yeah, I agree. Yeah, my name is Lisa Spence and I'm your host for today. Today, our speaker is going to be Miss Angela Hart, who is the program manager for the commercial LEO, which is Low Earth Orbit Development Program Office here at JSC. Ms. Hart began working at JSC in 1996, leading the pressurized cargo integration planning for the ISS program. In 2007, she moved to the Orion program and managed the vehicle flight and ground operations team. Angela is passionate about commercial spaceflight. She left the Orion program to follow that passion and supported the original commercial resupply services contract as the contracting officer representative, which laid the groundwork for that early ISS fixed price contract. After leading the first test flight, she became the SpaceX Visiting Vehicle Integration Manager for the early SpaceX test flights and the first 9 commercial resupply services contract flights. Following CRS, Commercial Resupply Services Mission 9, she became the ISS Commercial Crew Integration Manager, working closely with Boeing and SpaceX on their efforts to meet the ISS requirements and service needs for crew. Ultimately, she moved to the Commercial Crew Program to help in the reorganization of the Mission Integration and Management Office. During her tenure in this role, she oversaw the successful completion of the Dragon Demo 1 and 2, the Crew Mission 1, and the initial OFT flight before transitioning to her current role. Angela received a bachelor's degree in operations research and industrial engineering from Cornell University. Following graduation, she served for 7 years in the U.S. Army, serving as a Hawk Missile Air Defense Artillery and Military Intelligence Officer. And I think what that really translates to is you don't really want to mess with her. She also served as an intelligence analyst for the Texas National Guard Counter Drug Task Force, and then as a criminal investigator for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So I'm going to bring up her presentation, and then we'll have Angela come up and share her wisdom with us.
LEO, it stands for Low Earth Orbit. That's a portion of outer space about 250 miles up, and for over 20 years it's been home to the world's most unique laboratory, the International Space Station. In this weightless environment, the space station has enabled scientific and engineering breakthroughs that just weren't possible on Earth. It's taught us more about our planet, physics and biology.
It's a great video, by the way.
It is.
And it's preparing humans to travel farther from home than ever before.
We will get the link out to you on
And as
YouTube.
the space station approaches its end of life,
we're
America will maintain leadership in LEO by enabling a new era of commercial spaceflight. Through the Commercial LEO Development Program, NASA is working with industry partners to develop the first generation of commercial space destinations. These will be privately owned and operated space facilities, where NASA will be just one of many customers. This new orbital economy will stimulate commerce and usher in the next generation of aerospace engineering, opening the door for scientific discoveries and private astronauts, allowing NASA to continue its critical research in LEO, supporting deep space exploration and bringing those benefits back home to Earth. Welcome to America's future in low Earth orbit.
Okay, the video is really a whole lot better than what we just got, but we will have the link to that available.
Awesome. So you can hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I would ask you to take a minute. We'll send you out to the link to the video. I think it is a great start for the program. Obviously, we are starting something extremely daunting when you're starting with the International Space Station, which, you know, is a feat of engineering and has really just been the cap in NASA's portfolio for a long time. And so we're filling really, really big shoes. And we take it very seriously. So came here to really talk about a little bit about what we're doing in commercial development. We really are a program that was really given direction straight from Congress, right? And straight from the agency. It didn't develop out of a need necessarily of NASA. Do we have it?
We lost the screen share, so let me see if I can get it to reboot again.
And I'll talk while you're doing that. So we really were given direction from Congress back in 2018, along with both strategic strategy as well as NASA agency policy. This was rolled into an overall program that ISS was working back then, which really was being brought forward by Mary Beth Adine out of the OZ office in ISS. Many of you guys may remember that. And she had a 5-point plan on how to move us into commercializing the LEO economy. And at that time, they started a number of initiatives, including a NASA interim directive to allow commercial activities on ISS, which evolved into Focus Area 3 that turned into the private astronaut program that we have today. And so there were a lot of programs that kicked off that effort that NASA developed in order to meet the exact words of take what we know today, move this over to industry, get to a place where we can turn over LEO to the commercial sector so that we can now concentrate on Moon and Mars. And so that was the beginning of this, right? And so that was kicked off very well. We have a lot of initiatives that the ISS started under that program that we're still doing today, and I'll talk about some of them. But we did start getting some pushback really from OMB and others about whether or not we needed a program to do that. And so that's when the Commercial LEO Development Program was started a couple of years ago. And so we sat down with ISS, we transitioned a lot of that work that was being done in the OZ office into the program, along with some other initiatives that were being done at headquarters, and created the Commercial LEO Development Program. We're really building off, as was ISS at the time. And so we reworked the strategy, we represented it back along with a new budget and a new plan on how we want to get there. And our strategy really is based on the successes that we had on CRS and CCP. We really are using that strategy, which I got to have the pleasure of working on both of those programs and seeing the fruition of that, and really very early on with the commercial cargo, even the acquisition strategy and the development of those requirements, is using a phase 1-2 approach to get industry where we want them to be, where we can hand over and buy services from industry at a time. And so, as I said, we started with cargo. So as we prepare for ISS end of life, we want to take all of that we learned from crew, and destinations is just the natural transition. We started with commercial cargo where we did not have humans. We were able to take some risks. We were able to practice and see how this was going to work. We moved that into the commercial crew program, where now we are certifying and human rating a vehicle for our crew, and now moving that into destinations, which brings it all together. If we did not have commercial cargo and commercial crew, you cannot have commercial destinations, because the ultimate goal is for those commercial destinations to own the end-to-end service, right? So we needed all aspects of this in order to be successful. And I feel like this is jumping on me, but that's okay. Some of the key assumptions that are going into this destinations, and we are working them all the time. There are a number of agency decisions and policy decisions at the agency that are still being traded. I was just talking to somebody about EVA. We're not planning today to do NASA EVAs on commercial destinations, but that could evolve over time. And so everything is an evolution as we see our partners, or the commercial industry partners, determine what is best for them in developing of their station. It is really key. One of the number one assumptions going into this is we want to be one of many customers. And that's really different from CRS and CCP, because they were really developing those capabilities for the ISS, and they were developing them based on purely the ISS requirements, with the goal that we would hope once these were built, they would go off and find other commercial avenues to use those capabilities. And we've seen that now on on Commercial Crew with the Dragon Inspiration mission and the other missions that they're working separately. Haven't quite seen commercial cargo, but really you can't use commercial cargo if you don't have a commercial place to go. And so destinations will be a great avenue for commercial cargo to move into, once there is a commercial destination there to go to. So that one of many customers is super important, and it does change, and we'll talk about it a little bit, the way we think about how we do acquisition strategy for destinations. It's a little bit different than, it has a little different challenges than we had on Commercial Crew. We want them to be commercially owned and operated. That's the same as we did for cargo and crew. And we want them, of course, to be safe, reliable, and cost-effective. Cost-effective being a very key piece of it. One-to-many being very key piece to NASA, meaning we do not want to foot the whole bill. We expect them to have other customers that are going to be part of their business case for them to make a business case to have this on orbit. That NASA may be an anchor tenant, but we will not be funding the whole development. We want regular production, distribution of trades and goods and services outside of our needs. Other key areas that go into the requirements that we're building, and this was a late decision. When I took over as the first program manager for the program, this was not decided. But it has since been one of the policy decisions that has been decided and being discussed now at the U.S. Space Council, is that we do want to continue the national lab activities that we do today under cases. That doesn't mean we will continue cases per se, but we do want a portion of what NASA purchases on a commercial destination to go into a national lab type of activity where we are doing research at both the commercial and university and research level, as well as other government agencies, and continue to provide that service to the nation. And so U.S. National Lab concept is being worked. What does that look like in this new regime? Because it does look a little different when it's not your space station, right? So and it looks a little different if you have more than one, which is the other big key assumption that we're going in with. Obviously, that will be dependent on budget and other aspects that will continue to evolve over the next couple of years, but it's really critical for us that we have more than one space station under contract. We've seen, and many of you live this, and I recognize a lot of faces that I know, and I recognize a lot of your names on line, some of which I'm still working with today in other aspects that you've gone on to do after your NASA careers. And so it's really important for us to have more than one station. We saw the importance of that under CRS. We saw the importance of that CCP. And the other big key point is okay, thanks. The other,
you're in the camera.
all right, no, oh, I'm in the camera, okay. The other key point is that we really want continuous human presence, and we've seen that having, did I do something because stuff's popping up? Is it still online?
Yeah.
Okay. The other key point is that we want to have continuous human presence, and we want to be able to have that backup capability to do that. And so we think it's really important. We also think it's super important because it drives costs down for NASA. Competition is real and is really important. And it's really important in this idea of having one-to-many customers, because they are now going after commercial business in order to make their business case. And so competition is definitely something that we're seeing is spurring them differently than we saw it on CRS and CCP. So that's another kind of key difference. You want me to use that one? So we also have, over the last few years, as we've been moving into the requirements phase, which is where we're at right now, trying to define exactly what is that service that we want to buy post ISS. We do know, and NASA's kind of made the decision that we want at least 2 crew members continuously, 2 U.S. crew members. We want to maintain U.S. leadership and U.S. crew presence. So we're looking at about a crew, NASA crew of 2. So some stations that you'll see when we talk about them are looking at 4, some are looking at bigger stations. So you can see we're not going to be the only people on board. We also want, as I mentioned, the ability to keep doing Leo National Lab, and we want the ability to do about 200 experiments. That's about half of what we do on ISS today. That is evolving as we speak too. We have a lot of meetings ongoing with the user community within NASA and other government agencies to really determine what do we think, what's the kind of science that we want to do in 2040, right? What is it we're asking them to go do? Do we necessarily want the same facilities that we have on ISS today, or do we want something different? And so that is evolving. The decadal survey is just coming out. Folks are off looking at that. That's going to give them that outward look over the next 5 years. And so that is being evolved. If you're interested in this area, NASA has put out a couple white papers through the program. We did put 2 white papers out a few months ago that went out publicly. One was a very high level initial ConOps of how we see commercial LEO destinations working. And the other was an updated utilization white paper on what we think that we need to purchase from CLDs in the future. That white paper was an update from one that ISS did and Robin Gaines did out of headquarters back in 2018. So that was an update, but we're continually evolving this, and we're evolving it also as we learn more from our partners on what they think they're going to be able to provide. As many of you guys know, even on CRS and CCP, and many of you may or may not remember this or were part of it, we will eat up any capability that's available if it's available, right? And so we also need to see what's reasonable. CRS-1 does not look exactly like CRS-2. And so there's also a real dance between asking for too much too soon. We want them to be successful, and then, leading that in. But they also have their own goals. So that's another thing that we're working back and forth with them. And then, so as you can see, we want to keep doing technology demonstrations, crew accommodations, national lab services, payload and biological research, earth science, human research. But I have endless possibilities here because we are asking to be one of many customers, and we expect there will be new ideas coming out of the commercial sector or coming out of entertainment and tourism, or what else could be done on a commercial destination that we can't even think of, right? That could end up being that killer app, that it will take us to the next level. We are continuing to work things to try to help them get there, but I expect it'll be something different that we have not thought of, that is going to be the main thing that gets us where we want to go. So as I already mentioned, the program was created in 2020. We established it here at JSC. It consolidated all the ComLEO initiatives that were kind of being done both by ISS and the headquarters into one place. It's purposely to invest in commercial LEO architectures, not just destinations, and I'll talk about that in a few slides as well, but also really key to implementing this U.S. policy that keeps coming down from Congress. It wasn't just what came down in 2018-19. You see it in 2021, 21, 20, in 22, the continual pressure from federally for us to commercialize space, and NASA has a main role in that. And also, we also are continuing to support demand, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a couple other charts as well. It's not just the supply side, it's also the demand side that we know is important for us to continue to work with, because when ISS does go away, for this one-to-many customer option to work, they need to have other customers. And so we're working on that as well. Talked a little bit in just a few words about the strategy, but many of you have been involved with CRS or CCP would probably recognize this, but it's a version of how we did the commercial resupply and the commercial crew program strategy. It's this phase 1, phase 2 approach. Phase 1 is where we're working with providers as a partnership. We do, in many cases, have paid milestones, which is really insight milestones for us, but we're providing them NASA expertise. We're reviewing their products, but it is their requirements. It's their architecture. It's their plan and their business plan on how they want to get to a commercial LEO destination. We are not driving the requirements. And we do that for a couple reasons. And it's super important under CLDs, even more important than it was on CRS and CCP. One, we want innovation. And so if we were to write the requirements, typically we would write what we already know, and we would pretty much write what we do today on ISS. And, we would, if we had to write them today, because we don't really know what we want in 10 years, right? And so, and we would be driving a lot of costs potentially. And so we want them to have some capability to evaluate what they're doing and to bring back to us what they think their architecture. And so for the first couple of years, we're working these both funded and a contract, and many of you are aware of these. We have 3 funded Space Act agreements that were awarded, one with Blue Origin, one with NanoRacks, and one with Northrop Grumman, that is very similar to what we did on CRS and CCP using funded Space Act agreements. Then we also have the contract, the CETUS contract with Axiom Space. That was a competitive contract, and the funded agreements were also competitively awarded funded Space Act agreements where NASA offered a port to industry to go develop a commercial space station starting on ISS that would have the capability to leave ISS after ISS end of life and become a free flyer. But this is a strategy that started prior to the program. It was started under ISS, so that contract was awarded before the program was created and was awarded under ISS. And back then, the train of thought was, what is the best way to help industry develop a destination? And we really had mixed thoughts about that. Is it easier for them to go straight to orbit like we did and develop their space station? Or is it easier for them to start on ISS, learn from ISS, kind of have the backup of ISS and all the capabilities of ISS, and then leave? And so that's why you have the 2 different approaches. But they will all funnel in to phase 2. Phase 2 will be a firm fixed price contract which will be open. It won't be excluded to just these 4 providers. It will be a free and open competition. So other providers, and you may be hearing about others in the news. Sierra Space has a Pathfinder similar destination that they're considering. Vast Aerospace has put out some press of things that they're doing, and I'll talk about some of them also in some future slides. So it will be a free and open competition where we will down select to 2 or more, which is the goal, to have a minimum of 2 destinations for NASA to buy services from in the future post ISS. So that's how you kind of get to the phase 2. The other piece of that is it's really important that we do an orderly transition, right? We really want to try to maintain research up until the very last day that we have ISS, that we can. I mean, it's such an amazing space station. It provides all kinds of services and all kinds of research and tech demos for the government and other government agencies, as well as commercial and research and universities. And we want to continue that as long as we can. And we want to be able to orderly transition that to the CLDs when they're ready. We take it very seriously that NASA, along with other government agencies, should not be competing with industry. So when there is a commercial LEO destination available, we should be considering buying services from them when that time comes. So that's where this supply side that you see on the chart is. Then there's the demand side that we talked about, and there's a number of areas that we're working to try to stimulate demand to make sure that we're growing that market as we move forward in development. So when we get to that transition, that one-to-many customers can be realized. And so a couple different ways we're doing that. Demand stimulation is a specific area where we are putting in funding to help researchers in the development of in-space manufacturing activities. And that's currently being done by ISS. It started on ISS. It was in our program for a very short time, and then it went back to ISS. We are very closely tied in with them because we care a lot about where they're going, and we want to make sure that our providers know what's going on in that arena. And, you know, we're touching base with all those customers, but that is something that's continuing to be funded by the ISS program, and they do on ISS today. The other area that, as well as you know, as part of ISS is the ISS National Lab that is managed by CASIS. We are working closely with them as well to figure out how we do this transition, what the future U.S. National Lab would look like. And so that's another area we're partnering with ISS to continue towards more and more activities on station that we can do so that we can continue to move that and then move that all those customers onto a commercial platform. Commercial use of ISS is a very special, small area that we do work with Station. Station does the implementation and the heavy lifting since it's on ISS. We really do the customer front door contracting, so to speak, piece of it and bring in the customers. But basically, it's an opportunity for commercial activities on ISS that aren't in the research arena, where they can come in and purchase up mass, down mass, potentially crew time if it meets certain requirements, and they can test out things on station that do not go through cases. So it's things that would not go through cases, but developing other markets. And then we have private astronaut missions. I'm sure many of you have been watching the successes that we've been doing on private astronaut missions. We now have had 2 Axiom private astronaut missions that have been very successful, and we own those contracts, obviously, just like all the activities that are utilizing ISS as a platform to expand these commercial activities. We work super close with the ISS, and they do most of the heavy lifting since they do all the implementation and operations for PAMs. And we really work out the policy and contractual work on that and some of the other small areas related to PAMs. I don't want to down talk what our team's doing because they do a lot, but ISS obviously has the lion's share on making sure that's successful. And so we want to continue to do that. We would like to get to a goal of 2 PAMs per year on station. We haven't quite been able to get there yet. And then even post Axiom commercial element, we would like to be able to continue to have at least 1 PAM. Obviously, once a commercial element goes up to ISS, it's going to make their ability to support other activities and more traffic much more difficult. So we will continue to assess whether that will be an opportunity, but we do expect to continue to do private astronaut missions. We've seen a switch in that a little bit. We really have done a lot of market studies in demand, had a lot of market talking about how tourism and the entertainment industry would really be the big area that would fuel this in the beginning. You did see tourists on PAM, the first PAM, first Axiom mission. However, they want to be serious astronauts. We really aren't seeing, like we saw in spaceflight participants, like over on the Russian side, most of the people interested in doing these activities want to do serious work on station. They want to do serious outreach. And so that model seems to be changing a little, and we're seeing a lot more of that going toward the sovereign nation market and really expanding the market of other small, countries that have smaller space programs and allowing them to break into space. And so now you've seen, the first Saudi Arabian astronauts, first female, Saudi astronaut, and you're going to start seeing more firsts for those kind of countries as we move along. But we do still expect tourism and entertainment will be a big portion. That's kind of been tampered because there are limitations of what we can do on ISS. It is a government facility, and so we have a lot of rules and regulations and a NASA image that we need to protect that does disallow some of the ideas that have come out that I think could happen on a commercial destination in the future. But we do see this expanding and moving, and do expect in the early years that the sovereign nation market is going to be a lot of what you see. And then hopefully, as we start seeing new and more, if we had 2 space stations at the same time we had ISS, that's triple the number of commercial crew and cargo vehicles going up to space. If we, based on the overlap that you see that we're showing here, we'd like a 1 to 2 year overlap so that we have time to orderly transition. You would be tripling the amount of cargo and crew vehicles during that time period. And our estimation is that should help prices go down. And when prices go down, it's going to open up all kinds of markets that we can't do today. So a little bit about, I'm going to skip this because we've kind of already talked this, I think, in detail, a little bit more on the phase 1 to development. Yes.
Do you know if the commercial crew and cargo has capacity to meet that triple need that you're stating you have?
Well, the NASA contract does not, but the commercial industry will have to be working with those suppliers to see whether they can produce those vehicles. So that's part of the development we're doing right now, and the evaluation of their architecture, who they're planning to use. In some cases, they are looking at bringing on new vehicles, in some cases, potentially. Obviously, that's a lot of work, and we got to see if they'll be successful. There's a lot of what ifs, in those architectures, but we also will be starting to ramp down. We would probably not, triple's probably a bad number. We should be starting to ramp down as we do transition to less flights to station, because we'll be transitioning some of that research off. So we will have a little ramp down of capability on station as we ramp up the CLD. So it's probably maybe double. I also would argue that as we saw in CCP, they probably both won't be ready at the same time. You know, that just tends to naturally work itself out. And so you will probably end up with more of a gradual increase in flights, with ultimately down the road being, you know, double once we have ISS end of life. And by then our expectation is the market will be able to support that. And folks are looking at that, you know, we need to get Boeing off and flying, but I'm sure once they're flying and they are, you know, many of these vehicles are being certified to multi-flights. And so folks are absolutely off partnering with those right people and having those conversations in the development of their architectures. So as I mentioned before, we have the 4 big funded agreements or contracts where NASA is actually investing a certain amount of money for each one of these and providing them payments for certain milestones, whether you have the commercial destinations on ISS contract. So that's set up more as a contract framework. The reason that's a contract and not a Space Act agreement, as the others are, is because they are on ISS, there are very specific requirements levied on them that they will have to meet in order to be able to come up and be safe on station, in order to be able to COFR as part of the ISS. Under a Space Act agreement, you cannot levy requirements, right? We can provide them expertise, but they are working to their own requirements. And because of the way CDIS is structured and because they're coming to station, they have to meet station requirements. So we had to use a contract structure like over there. So the Axiom Space, they have completed their PDR. They're in the middle of their CDR, so they're quite far along in their development. They have TASI developing their first HAZ modules, and so they plan to transition to a free flyer 28 to 30 timeframe. I'm showing 28. This is probably a little older slide, but they would have the capability based on when they get their power module up there and the ability to move on and be a free flyer. Now, whether they decide to stay longer will be a conversation with NASA. Nanoracks Voyager Space is moving into their PDR and their CDR. So this is actually, I think their PDR is going to be more like in 24 with their CDR in 25. They originally had an IOC of 27. I think they're more in the 28 timeframe at this time. And they plan to have a 4 crew at their IOC. Northrop Grumman, similar, you're kind of seeing the same thing. When we put out the RFP for the funded Space Act agreements, our requirement was only to go to PDR. We will do a Delta CDR, if not a CDR, during phase 2, because that will be when we levy our NASA requirements. And so there will be that activity. So you will see a little difference in the strategy of each of these providers. Some going to PDR, some going to CDR. It really is dependent on their architecture. The requirement was to get to PDR. And then Blue Origin Sierra Space, similarly, they are in the middle of working their PDR today. And their baseline configuration sometime in 27, 28 timeframe. And they actually are going big, hoping for an 8 to 10 crew. Obviously, probably not right at IOC, even though that is their architecture they're working for. Their original proposals had a very large inflatable module being provided by Sierra that is quite impressive. If you go on their websites or are able to hear any of their conferences or any of their presentations, you know, it has a lot of capability, as do a lot of the folks here. What you're really seeing that's very interesting as we review these architectures is with the ability now of having, you know, Falcon Heavy and future New Glenn and these large rockets, the fairing sizes are so much larger that you're able to build, you know, a much larger set of modules than we were able to back in space station. And so the initial capabilities, even though it seems, how would they be able to do everything ISS does? They can have the volume that we have on ISS much quicker because of the size of the modules that they're able to put up there, just because of the expansion of the launch vehicle market and capability that's happened over the last few years. Some of the big accomplishments that we've seen from the partners, and these are not proprietary, all of these are out. Our office tries to put out press releases whenever we meet, big milestones and get them out there. If you're not familiar, we have a Leo Economy website and we keep that up to date. And there's a lot of good information out there. But Axiom, as I noted, was continuing to work through their CDR. So they're working really closely with NASA on that. They're fabricating their primary structure with two vehicles with Thales Alenia, and they're working, a lot of their long lead items and early procurement. So they were awarded a contract a couple years before the funded agreements. And so because of that, they're a little bit further ahead in their development than the other three parties. Blue Origin completed a month-long acceleration system creep test on that life module. That life module is also working some next step contracts with NASA through Marshall in the development of inflatables. And so they continue to move forward that activity. Nanorax has done a lot of demonstration on their material manufacturing. We're seeing a lot of, some of which I can't talk about in detail, but a lot of really interesting innovations and ideas on how folks want to develop these stations that are a little bit different than what we saw on how we did ISS. And they completed their SRR, and we're actually moving into their SDR in the next week. So we have SDR in just a couple weeks. Northrop Grumman also finished their SRR and is moving into their SDR in October. So moving pretty far along in their development. As I mentioned, we released a ConOps white paper to industry, got a lot of feedback from industry on that, expected a lot of feedback. They push back on a lot of ideas, that in their mind are not so commercial, that are a little too ISS-like, and we're evaluating that and seeing where we'll end up when we come to our final requirement set that goes out in RFP. And then we also put out that utilization white paper, and they're continuing to work with that. I think we had over 200 comments from industry on that RFI, which is quite a lot for an RFI. Commercial space capabilities is an area that we inherited from headquarters. They did some solicitations back in 2014 for a number of unfunded Space Act agreements with Final Frontier, Northrop Grumman, ULA, and SpaceX. These, again, are similar to the funded Space Act agreements that I've already mentioned, except for they're not limited to destinations. They're really limited to any capability that would further commercialization of LEO and be something that, would help us get to a LEO economy that is self-sustaining. And so those Final Frontier had been working some suit designs. That company actually was bought out and has moved into another company, but they were very successful. Actually, all of these were super successful. The SpaceX we were involved in some of their Starship testing and provided some expertise there. ULA did a lot of work on some booster work that they needed, and they needed some NASA expertise. And then Northrop Grumman did their EV, and that was their MEV, which was extremely successful if you're following that. And so after doing those programs, they kind of finished out under our program when they were transitioned to us, and I was given the opportunity to either cancel the program or continue it. We decided that we really, for the very small amount of money that we invest in this effort, which was only a few $1 million over 5 years, it was not a huge amount of effort, but it was a big bang to the buck for these providers to have access to NASA and their expertise. We decided to continue that. We actually increased the budget for this activity, and we just completed those solicitations and awards, and we awarded 7 new CCSC2 awardees. And you're going to see how a lot of these tie very closely with CLD. So Blue Origin was awarded an unfunded Space Act agreement. They want to work their New Glenn reusable launch system and to get it human rated. And they are also developing a crewed space vehicle. So that another big area of development. And these are developments that these providers are doing with all their own money. So even though there is a little bit larger budget for me to support them, that's all in-kind support. So it's us providing them technical expertise and engineering support, reviewing products, providing the feedback, or providing test facilities, but it's at a very, very, very low level. I would say single percentages, in the overall development, and they're funding 90% or more of that development. Northrop Grumman is working on a crewed tenant persistent platform. This is utilizing their Cygnus platform and seeing how they can use that in terms of a module, and have multiple applications of how they would use this. Also feeding into some of the other work they're doing on Halo and other NASA, and bringing that into a commercial enterprise on how they can sell a service. Sierra Space is working a separate Pathfinder CLD. It's similar to what they're doing in their work with Blue Origin, but a little bit different, to do a test flight. And then they're also working a crewed version of Dream Chaser under this unfunded. SpaceX is looking at Starship as a CLD. This is a very interesting concept. First with their Dragon to go up for crew and cargo, later as a potentially a sortie CLD. So they have some different ideas there. That all would include crew certifying a Starship, and et cetera, across the board there. So there's a lot of really interesting ideas that they have in this arena. And something that we really didn't think of. We've been thinking about CLDs as ISS-like, right? But maybe in the future, the right group of CLDs that would support NASA would be an unmanned platform and a sortie platform, and then maybe a platform similar to ISS that stays up there, and providing a suite of services, each of them kind of doing something a little bit different, a little more specialized, that would help bring the price points down, versus having everything on a crewed rated station and all the things that go with a crewed rated station. So we're starting to think about these ideas as people are bringing in new ideas to us. Special Aerospace Services is working on a robotic MMU system for external ops. Everybody knows how complex EVA operations are, and most of the CLD providers would like to have a system that does not require EVAs for maintenance. I don't know if they'll get there, but this is SAS's idea on a potential area that they could go provide as a service to CLDs and others. Could be also used for satellites, et cetera, et cetera. Think Orbital is working on a robotic assembly and weld system. It's basically a really interesting concept of being able to do manufacturing welding on board, using, and I'm not an expert in this, I'm going to say I'm going to say beam welding, but I don't know if that's the right term. I apologize. But they have some really great ideas. They are moving quite far along. They're very excited to be working with NASA. Many of the folks that you saw on this list are also partnering with each other. They have partners within this group and with each other that are working on these partners as well. And then the last item is Vast Space, who is looking to provide a CLD to NASA in the future. They have made it clear that they would plan to bid on that future phase 2 firm fixed price. And so they are working to put up an early small space station before we even go into phase 2. So they're looking at a really, really early IOC with their long-term plan for artificial gravity. That is really their long-term goal. They also have been partnering with folks and have some very strong relationships with SpaceX. So very interesting stuff that's going on. Really excited about the CCSC2 awards. A lot of work for the program and JSC and the other centers, but really something that we think is worthwhile. And just their artist renditions of some of the things that they're working on. I won't go, I'll leave this up just for a minute so you can take a look at it, but you can look at it on your own time. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about before I open it up to questions was just an overview on PAMs. We've talked about them a little. This is really something that we're doing to expand the LEO economy, to provide ISS as a destination for both folks like Axiom that want to do private astronaut missions as a business, but really even their end goal of the purpose of private astronauts is for them to test out all their systems that they would then later use on their CLD. And we want the ability to use ISS as much as we can to further all of our CLD providers and all of our commercial entities that are trying to do stuff in LEO, since it is the only destination that we have up there. And it's a unique platform that can test out a lot of their technical demonstrations, can test out their processes. And so AX1 was a great example of that. They successfully completed all their objectives. They had 24 research experiments, multiple educational outreach and commercial media activities, which are also interesting. You know, we had an Israeli astronaut on that. There was a ton of outreach that was done in Hebrew, in other, you know, that was done that would never have been done, would have reached a demographic that we were not reaching. And so not only are we bringing in new countries into our fold, into the space industry, we're also bringing, you know, a new set of youth that's getting excited about space because we're bringing in these new countries. And I think you all know who was on that flight. And then we had PAM2, another big success, similar manifest in terms of science outreach and commercial activities as they did on AX2. And I think we'll continue to see this trend with future CLDs. Notable firsts that we already talked about. But one thing that we haven't talked about and was really kind of an artifact that we weren't planning is flying a PAM to ISS also offers NASA an opportunity to buy a service. Now, we don't have a service contract. We're not advertising, we want to buy services, but it does provide an opportunity when needed for us to be able to utilize that as another vehicle that comes to ISS. And so ISS has been able, when they've needed it, to use it for key return items. You know, we've been able to expand some of the science in our refrigerator and freezers on those missions that we would not have been able to bring home without this mission. So NASA is actually benefiting, even though it's a completely commercial mission. NASA does not sponsor, they pay for the vehicles, they pay for the end service. NASA is still benefiting as well as they are, you know, from that. And PAM3 is our next one that's coming up. It'll look a lot like PAMs 1 and 2. That training has kicked off. We've already made some major key milestones. They are targeting that sometime in May, though we are still evaluating that launch date, or excuse me, November. We're still evaluating that launch date. Unfortunately for PAMs, you know, they have to fit in between our other flights, and when other flights move, they have to move. That is definitely an artifact. But we've been able to work that out with Axiom and their customers so far. So, and then PAM4 we just awarded to Axiom another in August, and so we're working to finalize the content of that and what astronauts will fly on that vehicle. And we're hoping to go out in the next couple months with a solicitation for PAMs 5 and maybe 6 if headquarters will let us do 2. So I think that's my last chart. And I will open it up to questions. And I got lots of questions. I'm excited. Trying to talk fast so I could get to questions because that's really what people want to.
Okay, Angela, thanks a lot. Fascinating discussion. How does the funding work for these PAM missions? Who pays who?
Yep. Okay. So when ISS, the idea of PAMs and the idea of that other little small focus area 3 is we really wanted to stimulate demand. And so when I started in this program, we were actually planning to subsidize those missions. We actually had a subsidy strategy, and there's a pricing policy that's actually on that LEO economy website I mentioned before. As I came in and we started evaluating this with our stakeholders, it became very clear that we did not want to subsidize, that we felt it was very important that we did full cost accounting on these, and that we, even though we're offering ISS as an opportunity for commercial companies, they need to be paying the full cost, and NASA should not be subsidizing. So very early on in the beginning of the program, we updated the pricing policy. And so if you go to the LEO economy website, it actually tells you what it costs to do a PAM. It says how much crew time they have to buy, you know, what the services are for TDRS, blah, 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 you know, the whole 9 yards. So they owe NASA those dollars. And so when we negotiate the contract, we work all that out, we come up with a number, and so they could owe NASA. In some cases, we have bought services from them. So we bought a paramedic locker that offsets that, and it's handled just like a normal contract would be. And even in some areas, most areas, there's a couple areas that I would say are not completely full cost, because like my team that is promoting this and developing, they're not paying for my team, right? But they are paying for expertise. They're paying for some examples I could use. They have to pay for escorts. When they're on site, they have to pay for the training they get in from FOD or from KBR. So all of those things are outlined. Some of that is done under reimbursable Space Act agreements, and then some is done in the contract. So there are quite a few. Axiom has quite a few reimbursable Space Act agreements at JSC and KSC that pay for some of those services that they need, and then the rest is covered in and worked out in the negotiation of the contract.
On these private space missions, is Tom Cruise still talking with NASA about doing a film on orbit, doing EVA?
There's still discussion about, future entertainment options that are always out there. We're not evaluating anything today, but I know that there's still a lot of interest in doing something. I think that an EVA is a big ask for NASA. We think it's extremely dangerous activity. We don't do EVAs for fun. They're highly risky. And so doing a NASA EVA, I think, is a big stretch. I know that there's been conversations about it. I don't think that we would do one, but things can happen. You can be directed. But I think that the evaluations are also, our EVA hardware has had issues, and we certainly have lifetime limits in that hardware, and that hardware is extremely expensive. And so all those factors would go into NASA deciding if we would ever determined that we wanted to do an EVA. I do think there's always benefits. There's been lots of movies out there that NASA has collaborated on, over the years. There's been some filmed here at JSC and KSC, and I think we benefit from the press when a really good script comes out that, I'm sure the Navy benefited a lot on Top Gun, the recent Top Gun. And so it's something that OCOM up at headquarters would evaluate, just like they do any media documentary or any other media activity. The fact that it might happen on a PAM or on a commercial destination, we would cross that when it came to it, right? But we would evaluate it in terms of OCOM and all that, and our standard media guidelines, and make sure it meets NASA's needs.
What else? Nearby, speak up good into the mic, please. You're having trouble hearing.
It seems like there's a small period of time between the soonest one of these space stations come online and ISS goes away, which I hope ISS doesn't go away. Not much time for these commercial space stations to mature and be ready, for the day that there's no more ISS.
Yep.
So how do you feel about that?
So the program has been challenged with the schedule to meet the current ISS end of life date. There's no guarantee that ISS would be extended or all our IPs would agree to extension, but certainly we're always talking about those things, right? So that is the date that we're working to. I think in terms of really understanding where our partners will be, you've got some scenarios like Vast Space that plans on their own dime to go build a small space station and have it in orbit way beyond those IFCs, and we'll be watching to see if they do that, right? We'll be following along, and now that we have an unfunded Space Act agreement, we'll have a lot of insight, into what they're doing. When we go out with that phase 2 contract, obviously they have to go through human rating certification like we did under Commercial Crew. And at that time, I think we really will nail down what we think that schedule looks like. Right now, we're operating and supporting the schedule that they are trying to meet internally themselves, because this is their development under phase 1. It's not being driven by our date. It's being driven by what their company wants to drive that date to. When we go into phase 2, they will have a contract and they will have a commitment date. And I'm sure at some point, we will finalize what we think that date is going to look like. And if we don't think what we have today is realistic, we'll contract for a different date at that time. But right now we're working to what they want to develop, they're funding it, they're doing the development. And so we're certainly not wanting to slow them down, right? We want them to be successful, and we're encouraging them to do so.
I don't know how the schedule worked out for the end of life of ISS and this new program, but somehow NASA is going to figure out how they're going to do the ending of life. So is it possible that people thinking about it, that maybe some of them are biologics, or maybe we can get rid of them and they have the responsibility of using it or whatever?
So,
Didn't pick up over.
okay, the question I think was, as we go into ISS end of life, we'll have to figure out what we're doing with ISS, right? And is there a possibility that a CLD provider or a commercial entity could utilize systems or modules on station, right? So we are looking at that. We are working with the ISS program in a lot of arenas. We're working to understand what flight hardware is on the ground, what spares you think would be available. We want to take advantage of every single piece of hardware, you know what I mean, that there is, to promote, one, to drive NASA's cost down, but to also promote success with the providers. There have been, way before my time, and I'm not an expert in it, and I certainly have no data on it, but there have been discussions in the past about handing over ISS as a commercial entity to somebody. And I just feel like what I've heard is all of the assessments of that have just never really come to a position where we felt that that was viable, or that we had industry that wanted to do that. Certainly in a scenario where someone like Axiom Space, if they were to win phase 2 and they're already attached to station, I'm sure we will have conversations associated with that. But we're not having those yet because they have not won the phase 2 contract. And, we want to make sure that they're actually going to get there. But we would certainly have those conversations. But we are absolutely looking at what could come down, what is already on the ground that could be utilized. We're already talking about how to use the MPLMs that are on the ground. You know what I mean? So we're absolutely having those conversations and starting to think about, many of you may remember shuttle end of life and all the hardware we had and all the work that was. And we're starting to think about that and trying to prepare ourselves. We don't have the same authorities that we had back when shuttle end of life, in terms of like targeted GSA sale and things like that. And so we're starting to think about that as well. We know that's a very big effort, and ISS has set up an ISS transition team that's off looking at that, looking at contracts, looking at, when those key decision points are as we move forward, to make a decision when they would have to make a decision if we want to extend, because we've got contracts that have to be awarded, or flights that have to be purchased, and we're evaluating all of that and developing that plan, between the two programs, so we clearly understand what those are and know when we have to make those key decisions. A lot of work though coming up.
Good question. Are you badged to headquarters or the program?
Am I what?
Are you badged to headquarters?
No, I'm a JSC. It's a JSC program, and I work for Vanessa.
Okay.
I also have a headquarters boss too in SOD. I have many bosses.
Everybody is. And then how many contractors? Do you have integration contracts?
So let me repeat the question, because I'm hearing they're not hearing on. So the first question was, am I a headquarters badged individual? And the answer was no, I'm JSC badged, and this is considered a JSC program. And so I report to Vanessa as well as SOMD in the development for CLDs. The second question, which I've already, I think, forgotten, is what kind of contracts I have in terms of contractor support. So couple things for the program. We do have some contracts, but we don't have any major contracts. We are piggybacking a lot on ISS right now, right? They have a lot of contracts. They have a lot of the capabilities those contracts have. And so we're doing task orders right now, mainly on those ISS contracts, because that makes more sense for NASA than to go out and put out new. But we are, as part of that ISS transition work, they're identifying those contracts. They're identifying the facilities that they fund. We're starting to have those conversations, and so that we know when we do get to ISS end of life and when those contracts do go out, who would need to pick up those, because I think almost everybody on the center is piggybacking on somebody's contract, right? So that's what we're doing today.
So are you organized around the contractors that are bringing in elements?
Yes and no. So we're very early in the development. You know, we started out when I was claimed to be a program, I had 3 people, but they call me a program, right? And so we have been growing very, very fast over the last couple of years. And we have also been adding program offices as we need them, you know what I mean, till we get to our end state, which we need to be at full end state when we go into phase 2, right? When we go into the phase 2 contract. So I do have your typical systems engineering office, PP&C office, you know, et cetera. Some offices I haven't brought online yet. I don't have a mission integration and ops office yet because I'm not really in ops, but I do have, and then I have project offices that would go away someday. Like I have a special office that just works all the commercial activities we do on station, that works with station. And then I have an office, as you mentioned, that provides project execs and tie-ins to all the partners. So I have a partner exec that is assigned to Blue Origin and so they have their offices. Those would later, once we go into a phase 2 contract, would roll into probably our vehicle office, which we don't have yet, you know what I mean, which would be our expertise moving into operations. And so we have an evolutionary approach as the program will grow over time. And so I think on step 2 or 3, you know, of maybe an 8-step process to get us to the end. And I probably should have put an org chart in there, but good question.
So a futuristic concern, but are we coordinating with Space Force possibly for the future?
So the question was, are we coordinating with Space Force? So similar to CCP, there are a couple big areas that we're still trying to figure out where our place is in those arenas. Regulations is a big one, right? We're watching very closely the conversations that are going on in terms of who's going to regulate space. Well, the moratorium will be, you know what I mean, canceled, and all those kind of activities. So those are mainly managed out of headquarters, as is the liaison with Space Force. But we have folks assigned that kind of keep tabs on what's going on there and bring back any concerns. We do plan, similar to what CCP did, on having a program with the FAA at some point, you know, where we might have somebody that works at the FAA, they work with us, you know what I mean, so that we can make sure as we are finalizing our requirements that we are aligned. And if a regulatory agency is defined to be the agency that will be developing requirements for future CLD regulations, we'll create a relationship with them. And the same thing's kind of there with Space Force, right? We're trying to find opportunities, especially in like the CCS2 area, where they're also putting out, you know, contracts to do development on certain things, that where could we partner, you know, to get the best bang for the government, but we don't have a direct relationship yet.
I got one over here. I got one real quick myself.
Sure.
Could you go into more detail about what is being done on the hand stimulation side, and also is the budget and that adequate to really get the demand there?
I can talk about it a little since it moved last year back to station. Kevin Engelbert over in ISS is leading the piece mostly related to in-space manufacturing and some of those areas. I'm sure he would tell you he could use a much bigger budget. They have done a lot of great things, but there are a lot more people interested. And they're really kind of in, you know, trying to work some of these companies through the valley of death and really show that you can do these things on orbit in microgravity and then help them scale, you know what I mean, later. And is it scalable? So we're still in the, does this make sense? And is it scalable kind of approach? I do think budgets are going to be a struggle as we move forward. I'm sure everybody's watching what's going on up on the Hill right now, and we all are expecting that that's going to impact NASA, and there's a lot of what ifs going on in that relationship. Additionally, some of the initiatives that ISS was doing in the commercial ISS activities that I mentioned are being rethought for a couple of reasons. We did some marketing and advertising campaigns as a test case to see if people would be interested in doing marketing and advertising on station. Some of you may remember we did an Estee Lauder campaign. We did a couple, I say we did, commercial companies did, but they paid us for crew time and upmass to do these things. And I think they were successful, and I think there is interest there, but they could actually buy that from Axiom on a PAM. And so if I'm doing that, I'm kind of taking away potentially their customer base. So there are some things like that, that now that we have private astronaut, now that you have inspiration type missions, we're starting to wonder, are we competing with industry? And we're starting to evaluate that, which is tough because we still think it needs to be pushed, right? We still think it needs help, but we also can't compete. So there's some of those areas that we're really thinking about still, certainly in the R&D area. But also, one of the things I didn't mention in those unfunded agreements that we did with the three big ones we mentioned, we added marketing and customer development milestones to those agreements. That's the first time NASA's ever done something like that. And so some of their payment milestones are them proving to us that they're off getting customers and they're off doing different things. And so some of them are doing some very interesting things in terms of partnering with Ohio University and building they're going to build, an analog lab on the ground that looks exactly like, you know what I mean, the space station in the air, and they're going to have and they're actually breaking ground and starting to do. So there are exciting things that industry is actually doing that we're following along. And so I would say we struggle because we're not business and marketing experts, right? And so we struggle with where's the right way for us to insert ourselves in their market. And we're really looking for, we obviously do market studies and we have folks off doing that for us, but we're really looking industry to tell us where they need help. But we're really seeing them stepping up in a lot of these areas because we keep telling them, and we are very serious when we say one-to-many customers, that we are not going to foot the whole bill. They've got to go find customers. And so some of that demand stem is happening there. Like you're seeing Redwire is attached to, is partnering with some of these space stations, and they're doing a lot of stuff up on a station. NanoRacks already does a lot of commercial activities in there. So you actually see some, and they're bringing a lot of that up stuff through cases. So it's still happening up through cases. But could we do more? Absolutely. But we can only do so much. So thank you. You said one more?
There's a requirement that's been unfillable for delivering rapidly large payloads to undetermined areas of the world. So commercially, think of that as a trucking company. So I just wanted, I understand this just before we asked about Space Force, because obviously there's a requirement there. But it's also commercial, and it's also through these typically be suborbital. It may not be orbital, but you may have to stay in orbit to get a particular location. So conceptually, it's able to fit into your program.
Yeah, we're currently not. So the question was, there's a lot of work being done in terms of suborbital delivery, of goods across, the world. And that could potentially be an area that could come under the program or be part of what we're doing. We certainly watch a lot of that stuff because we know what you end up finding is you see offshoots off that end up being something that ends up impacting us. We are not targeting anything right now in suborbital. So when I put out the CCSC2, it had to be low Earth orbit. All the work right now being done in suborbital is being done either through flight opportunities or other projects within NASA. The commercial crew program has a separate activity that they're working suborbitally to see if we can utilize and certify the use of some of the suborbital platforms, the launches that are happening like through New Shepard and Virgin Galactic, and so they're off looking at how would you, through a different means of certification, not like CCP, more of based on flight history and other ways that we could potentially allow NASA-sponsored researchers to fly on one of those missions to do suborbital research and how we could use that as a stepping stone, to LEO. So there are other programs that are doing that, but we're not doing anything right now in this program suborbitally. We watch what they're doing because, again, I think it certainly will. And I actually meet with their program manager on that, their project manager that manages that on a frequent basis to see where they're going. But we're currently not involved in that. Maybe down the road, but not today. One more, sure. One more.
Okay, I know some of these companies are looking to work with foreign governments on doing this. Is NASA interfacing now or plan to interface to kind of help them along in the future?
Yeah, international partner participation is a very interesting subject that has it's another one of those policy areas that kind of is being defined, and has changed over time. We are still trying to understand how we want to continue with our international partners in the future. Both NASA and the federal government recognize the importance in terms of national security and foreign relations on all the great work that we do on station. And so we definitely want to continue to do that. Obviously, we're doing that through Artemis and the Artemis Accords and everything that's being done there, but we want to continue also to have our relationships in LEO. However, we don't, it's not going to be our space station, right? So we can't barter away this, that, and the other. So we are trying to figure out what does that look like. There was some policies put out, not so much in like a formal policy, but at the NSSC and some of the big conferences, Pam and others talked about what we think that's going to look like to the industry partners to get their feedback. We are encouraging international partners to work directly with providers. NASA has put a very strong position, and we can always change our position, but our position today that's been very strong is that we're not going to barter for or get involved in the development of modules or pieces of the space station within NASA. We certainly can encourage them to go do that, and there are definitely some of our providers that are actually working joint agreements and are absolutely working with international partners and have others they're planning to work with in the future, because for the same reason we did it, right? It's very expensive, and the more people that are involved, the better, for your success. So they are definitely working on that. We're keeping track of what's that limit. The firm fixed price contract will have to be a U.S. entity, right? There are certain guidelines and rules about how NASA does contracting. And so they will have to keep that it's maintained by a US prime, and they have a certain percentage of, the company and all those kind of things. In some cases, they could be bartering for seats like they did with us, or they could actually go in and have a joint venture or something with another company, another country. So all that is on the plate. But we know we will still want to do science collaborations with our international partners. We know that we will still be doing some other activities with them. There is always an opportunity for what's being done in Artemis to bleed into LEO. What's being done with our other international partners there. And so but exactly what that looks like, will it look like an IGA? Will it look like some other kind of agreement? Headquarters is working on that today. And there are a lot of new countries that want to get in the game, right? Not just the international partners that we have today, but the international partners we have today are super important to us, and we want to keep those relationships. And so we have been meeting a lot with them. We're understanding what their needs are, so that when we go out and say these are our requirements, we're also passing on to the partners, this is what we think ESA and JAXA, as well as they're talking to them themselves, need for the future. So I think it's kind of across the board. I don't think it's fully vetted. We will have some, and we are involved, and we are talking, and we have a number of international forums that we're working right now with our partners, our current partners, to talk about what the future looks like. But I also know every single one of our providers is also having those conversations as well, and trying to decide, everybody would like us to get to some winners, because then they could pick, they don't like having so many options. Options are not always good. So, but they are definitely having lots and lots of conversations.
Lisa, this is Bob
Do
Wren.
we want to see if people on, I feel like we left off everybody online. And I hate this thing. Mainly, they've been looking at my chin like the whole time. So I'm hoping in your recording, you like black my video out.
We just want to say that you did a good job and we really appreciate it very much. Some of us, after Apollo 11, we got shifted into studying multiple missions, low Earth orbit and Mars and lunar and so forth. But interesting, Hilton Hotels approached us about creating hotels in Earth orbit, in multiple orbits, and with artificial gravity. So this interest has been going on for quite a while. Keep up the work. You're doing fine. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So it wasn't a question, it was a kudos. So I appreciate that. So if you didn't hear, what was noted was that there has been interest in this even early shuttle days, especially even hotels in space. I know that when I was on the team with Mary Beth, when she was dreaming up early things back in OZ on this, and we whiteboarded all the different things that we think you could do in orbit. You know, we figure someday there's going to be, you know, Leo sports, you know, and whatnot. So I appreciate that you think that we're heading in the right path. It's a big job. We have an extremely aggressive schedule, as has been noted. I'm very fortunate to know that I've got ISS there that's there to help us, and also as a potential backstop if we aren't ready on the timeline that we have, as well as a place for us to go test out. There's lots of open questions there, you know what I mean, that people are going to want to test out their training. They're going to want to test out their astronauts. They're going to want to, you know what I mean? I expect that there'll be more and more they're going to ask from station. That's going to be the difficult part, because we've got so many people that want to do stuff on station, and how much of the station time we will be able to get. So thank you for the kudos. Was there any other questions online? And I'm sorry, I can't hear you. So I'm getting real close. I think that's a no. Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys asking me to come here. I hope that it's obvious that I'm passionate about this, and I have a very small team, but they're very, very passionate as well. And if you have any other questions, well, you should also, you could always invite some of our partners.
All right. Well, Angela, thank you very much for joining us today. That was really a great presentation. Definitely.
Too long.
Nope, you're fine. You still have 5 minutes left.